Okay, and we'll go ahead and get started. So this is our ProLinkHFA webinar series. We're going to talk about our risk assessments functionality today. Looking forward to that. Let me go ahead and push forward with our slide deck. So for our agenda today, I'm going to cover some general information, introduce myself and Kelly, and then we'll move on to our business process and demonstration. Kelly's going to go over a number of things related to our risk assessment functionality, property risk assessment, configuring the criteria for that assessment, our DCR risk criteria example, an NOI risk criteria example, and then an inspection risk criteria example. So lots packed into this next about 40 minutes or so together. I'm Bree Kruder. I'm the Executive VP for ProLink, and Kelly Encinias is our HFA Senior Product Manager. Thanks, Kelly, for joining us and helping me through this presentation. For those of you who have attended these, I know many people are regulars on our webinar series. Thank you so much for continuing to tune into these. For those who might be new, we put on our HFA webinar series on a monthly basis. Every first Wednesday of each month through October, and then November we host our annual ProLink Technology Live Conference, which is our user conference. We offer a lot of training sessions and some industry speakers during that two-day event, and it is open to the public. So while it's focused certainly on our user group, we do open it for all attendees in the affordable industry who might be interested in joining us for that. So that'll be November 7th and 8th this year, and you will start to see more about those in future webinars. We'll be sharing more information to register. Generally on these sessions, we cover a business case and then demo. Sometimes those are kind of blended together, such as today to cover risk. And this year's theme that we're covering right now is compliance updates and best practices. So we will continue with that theme through October. That will be the subject matter that we cover here. Just a little highlight on ProLink for those who may be less familiar with our company. We've been serving the affordable housing industry for quite some time now, over 20 years. Our clients are made up of affordable housing, state and local agencies, tax credit syndicators and investors, and even developers that we're serving with our products. From the very beginning, we have focused on building portfolio management systems for these constituents, really focusing on a holistic product offering for all of those different constituents in the industry. So beyond that, we try our best to connect these parties together between our agencies working with their partners, developers, property managers and owners, our syndicators working with their investors, all of that coordination effort that we need to keep consistent and efficient to provide more affordable housing in the market. That's what we look to do with our product offering. And our team is made up of technologists with a lot of time. A lot of them, including Kelly herself, have been with ProLink for quite some time now and have a great expertise in the affordable industry to serve our client base, which I think is so important in serving you well. So that is who ProLink is. A little bit more about us. So we currently are serving 17 state housing finance agencies. I'm looking forward to an announcement, hopefully very soon here, to make that 18, as well as 2 supportive services agencies. And then we also support 5 syndicators and investors. We have very strong partnerships with NCSHA, and we help support the NAMA XML standards group. That group actually uses Procorum to meet and coordinate those meetings on a regular basis as we develop the versions of NAMA XML that are then implemented by your software vendors. And then we do a number of things in the industry to just kind of get the conversation going around industry concerns and how software can help solve those concerns, including this webinar series for ProLinkHFA. We also do one that supports developers and property managers on a monthly basis. And then again, ProLink Tech Live, that conference I mentioned earlier. If you are part of our user group, we also offer quarterly training events, which are just kind of offered to all of our user base. So please inquire with us if you are interested in attending one of those sessions. Industry and technology leadership is very important to us, and kind of using best-in-class tools available to us. So that is represented by our partnerships with Amazon Web Services and DocuSign, using some of that functionality to enhance the tools that we offer within our own products. This is just a quick little picture of the agencies, again, that we represented on the previous page. You can see here the map, the topography of those 17 agencies and 2 supportive services agencies, one being in California. So you see a small little dot there representing that state. And I'm so happy to include Rhode Island and Maine Housing on this list in the East Coast, which are our newest live users of ProLinkHFA. Quickly, just going over our technology stack for those who might be new to our product. So ProLink offers a technology stack or a suite of products that are used together to provide your solution. We have ProLinkHFA, which represents our back office database system. So that's where our agencies are working every day. That's kind of your holy grail for record keeping and data repository. And then we have Procorum, which is our front end portal system that we offer. That is where you are interacting with developers, contractors, property managers, any third-party relations goes through Procorum. That is where you can conduct your NOFA application process, construction draw management, compliance reporting, all of the data that you receive periodically throughout the year. That all kind of takes place, kind of the messy collaboration space that we offer before then sending that data into ProLinkHFA and using that data to produce your analytics and reporting within ProLinkHFA. And then within just ProLinkHFA, the database, these are the main modules that we offer. So for those who are using ProLink today, your agency might be just focused on perhaps like asset management and compliance and multifamily development bond financing. Those might be where you do your work. We also do offer a single family development module as well. We have also helped clients to implement supportive services solutions, REO, and then a tool we call Budget Pro, which helps with construction draw management. Those are additional tools offered within the ProLinkHFA platform and product suite. But these are the main modules that our clients use on a regular basis. And with that overview, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kelly. I know she has quite a bit of content planned for the session today. So Kelly, go ahead.
Thanks, Bree. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you all as we move into the business process and demonstration. Bree, confirm for me that you can see my screen okay?
I can. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, as we kind of talk about and give a nod to kind of business process, risk really in and of itself is kind of its own sort of business case, use case. Risk is risk. It lets you, keep track of and evaluate the health of your portfolio overall. And so, many of you are doing some kind of, risk evaluations across your portfolio. Hopefully those of you who are customers are using ProLinkHFA. And if not, hopefully we can kind of give you some tips and tricks to kind of get your feet wet and get into it. So let's dive in. Let's start with looking at the actual risk assessment within a property itself. So you can see I'm positioned here within my favorite Garden Court Apartments property. Again, I'm in my demonstration environment. And this is a production environment. So, this is just like, those of you who are customers today, you have a production environment. We also have one that we use for demonstration. So we're here again at our Garden Court property, you can see my left navigation menu here. And as I kind of scroll down, you can see I find my risk assessments menu option. So I can click into that menu option. It's going to give me the listing of existing risk assessments, whether finalized or pending. Now, when a risk assessment is finalized, it's finalized. It's kind of closed out for whatever that time period is. And I can't edit that anymore. So I'm going to go into my pending risk assessment so that we can, look at it and maybe do some editing and whatnot. If I need to start a new risk assessment, I can just click new in my top toolbar. You'll see right now my new button is disabled because I've actually got an open pending assessment that I'm working on right now. So I can click into that row and it'll take me into my risk assessment. Now, inside the risk assessment, I actually have a couple of points that I want to bring to your attention. We've got our final assessment points, or basically our risk score, our risk assessment. And then we have a status that's associated to that. And we'll look at how that status is defined in relation to the risk assessment points here in a few minutes. But as we look here into our actual risk assessment, we see that on our first main tab here, we have what we call subjective criteria. So basically what this is a section, an ability within the risk assessment for the asset management officer, the risk officer, the compliance officer, all those involved, to effectively assign points in these various areas to this risk assessment, which ultimately allows those folks to really affect the overall risk score for the property. If maybe, the score that I have right now is 16, and maybe, as a compliance officer, I feel like that's a little bit too high of a score, right? I want to bring that score down a little bit. So I can choose, to say, hey, you know what? The owner at this property, they're extremely responsive to any request that we have. They're really good at working with us. So I can actually put a negative score in that field. And I always like to put a comment if I'm putting a subjective criteria score, because I want to tell myself later on, and I want to tell everybody on my team why I adjusted the risk score on this particular property. So I can do that -5, which actually subtracts points. And so you can see that immediately that takes my total risk score from 16 down to 11. Okay, so again, as the asset manager, risk officer, whatever my role is, I can truly affect the overall risk score or risk rating in a given property for a given time period. Okay. So next, we're going to take a look now at our activity detail tab. This tab is really describing to us what information, what data within the property is being evaluated to get us to this score of now 11 for a risk score on this property. So, what kind of inspections are being looked at to evaluate the risk in this property? And I can see that I do have tax credit inspections required on this property. And so the fiscal year that's being used here is 2019. Okay. I do require annual financials. Okay. I can see that checkbox there. And then I can see that the fiscal year 2021 is the year, or the version, if you will, of the annual financials that's being evaluated. And then I can see compliance audits or file reviews, what's being used there. And then as I kind of scroll down the screen a little ways, I can also see for my compliance reviews in that compliance period used, that's the version or the year or the period of the compliance review that's being evaluated. to help get us to this risk score for this property. So I always highly recommend for folks when you're doing risk assessments, come in, create this risk record, give a gander on that main tab to what that overall score is and what status that puts the property in. And then come immediately into your activity detail tab and really read and review and make sure that the records that you expect are being used in the risk assessment are actually being used, okay? Because of course, year to year, period to period, depending on the different details that you're collecting, those records can affect your risk score. And so particularly if you're seeing a risk score in your property that doesn't look right to you, or that looks greatly different maybe than the last risk assessment that you did. Come and look at this activity detail, make sure you're using the right inspections records, the right financials records, and so on, okay? And something quickly to note, in terms of your inspections records, you're going to be using the latest completed inspection record for your required inspections. And then with your annual financials, you're going to be using the latest approved annual financial that's there on the property. And then with your compliance audits or your file reviews, same idea as inspections, latest completed. So the example there being that, in terms of any one of these records, inspections, financials, file reviews, you could potentially have, maybe an inspection that you're working on, you've gone out and you come back, into your workspace and you're kind of working on a final report for that inspection, but you don't have that inspection marked as completed yet. Well, when you do the risk assessment, that record that you still have open and not marked as completed is not going to be used in that risk assessment. Okay. So, again, really important to really dig into the records that are being used in the assessment to ensure that you're getting the true score that you really should be for that given property. Okay, let's take a look now at our system generated criteria. So remember, on our main tab, we had our subjective criteria, right? That's criteria that we are in control of. We can set those point values. Our system generated criteria is point values that are coming from the assessment of those records that we see on our activity detail tab, and using the criteria that we have configured and putting out the appropriate score for our property. Okay, so system generated, we don't have quite the level of control like we do over our subjective criteria. Okay. Now, system generated criteria, of course, we have the control because we control, how our criteria is evaluated, what criteria we want to evaluate, and then, of course, updating, the detail and the records that we're using. But again, this is system generated. This is the score that's based on your risk model as you have it configured in the system. Okay. So let's take a look now at how do we configure this criteria that we see on this system generated tab. So that can be done by accessing our utilities panel, and then selecting our risk assessment settings menu option. Now remember, some of you who are customers today, you might not have access to this utilities panel. It might be a team lead, or even a system admin who might be configuring this criteria for you. So if you don't see that panel or you don't see that menu option, don't panic. It's just probably a security privilege thing that's going on there. So as I click into the risk assessment settings screen, on this first tab, we see the fields, the configurations for our actual risk status. Okay. So here we get to choose, how we label our status. Right now I have acceptable, watch, and at risk. And then we also, for each of those status types, we define the point range that defines that status. So I think my property had a score of 11 once I did remember that adjustment for that owner responsiveness. So an 11 puts me into a watch category, right? Because my watch category is from 8 points up to 14.99. Okay, so although I did, give that subjective criteria for that property's risk assessment, there is still something going on there that's putting that property into a watch status. And that's going to be something that I'm going to want to dig in, look at that system generated criteria, see what's going on. Why is this property scoring at this, high of point value to put them into that watch status. Okay. So in addition to configuring the status, you can see I've got loads of additional tabs here. And as I kind of click into my financial annual tab here, this is a listing by category of all the different criteria that I can configure to be used in my risk model. Now, I don't have to use everything that's here if it's not appropriate for my risk model. I will just leave the point values in those items that I don't want to use at a 0. And then those will not be used in my risk evaluations. Okay. So, we've got annual financials, monthly financials, inspections. This covers all the different types of inspections that we have available in the system. Loans and reserves. We've got compliance audits or file reviews, very, very similar kind of look and feel to inspections. And again, the various different types that we offer for those file reviews, We've got our compliance reviews. We've got some property management information, some information about insurance, and then we've got a miscellaneous tab. We've got a few things, liens and stabilization. And then we've got this section that we call pending status. And pending status section really is kind of it's an opportunity, an area for you to kind of customize and tailor, a handful of risk items that you might want to evaluate that aren't already available within all the criteria that you see. There's a little more detail to that. If anybody has questions about that, please reach out to us. I'm more than glad to do kind of a deep dive on that pending status and how you could customize using that. But nonetheless, this is the criteria that you set up, you configure with the various point values. And then these are the items that are used to measure or evaluate the risk in your property. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at a specific example here. Let's look at a DCR risk criteria and see how that works in our property, and what that scoring looks like and how we can affect the scoring that we might be getting for DCR. Okay, so my DCR is included in my annual financials, so I've clicked into that tab. And then I scroll down maybe about midway down the screen here, and I can see I have 5 options available here for evaluating the DCR in a given property. And you can see that I am able to do kind of a starting value and then kind of some value ranges, and I can assign point values to those to evaluate that DCR for the property. Okay. One thing that I do want to mention, you saw Bree kind of showing a slide deck earlier on. I also have slides within the slide deck, even though I'm not showing them to you right now, but you'll get the detail in the slides about like how DCR is calculated within ProLinkHFA. I've got all the line item detail for you in the slide deck to describe the data points that are used from the annual financials to calculate what that DCR is. So don't worry about that for the moment. But let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So we've got our DCR configured, 0 through 4, 0 being a better score, right? Because that's kind of how I have my model set up, is that a low score is good. I should mention, you can kind of flip the status over on its head if that's more applicable to what your current risk model looks like. If your current risk model says a high score is good, you could then just flip these point values around such that your acceptable, would be your 15 and above or the like. So just want you to know that, if you're considering using risk, you don't have to, stand your current model on its head per se. You can go ahead and tailor this to match that model that you're using. So let's go ahead and look at the DCR within our garden court property in the annual financials and have a look at, what score is that giving us right now and why, and kind of how do we see that change. So I've come back to my property, notice that I opened my main tab and I used my most recently visited to get back into my property. And so then I come into my risk assessment menu option again. And so I'll get that listing, and then I'll go ahead and go back into my pending record, right? That's the current risk assessment that I'm working on. And you'll notice I didn't save that adjustment that I made earlier on. So my point value is back up to 16. And it's just because I didn't save when I left the screen earlier. But let's go ahead and look at our system generated criteria tab. And I can see when I come to the tab, this actual first section is the annual financials, and the DCR there is the first section that my risk assessment is using. And so I can see that I'm getting a point value of 1 for my DCR. And that says that my DCR is between 1 and 1.2. Okay, that's why I'm getting that value of 1. So let's go ahead and let's walk into the financials, take a look at what our DCR is right now. And then we can look at changing one of the line items that's used in that DCR calculation, and then we can see how it affects our risk score. One thing that I want to note here as well, while we're back on our system generated criteria tab, only the sections of criteria where I actually have items configured are going to be open and displaying for me in my risk assessment. Okay. And that's just kind of a little helper, easy on your eyes kind of function. If you're not doing monthly financials, or if you're not using, let's say, lender file reviews in the system, then we're not going to make you look at that section. We'll just have that collapsed for you, and it's just a little bit easier on your eyes to see what you do have configured and what's really being evaluated. Okay, so let's go ahead and drop into our standardized financials. Now remember, on our activity detail tab in our risk assessment tells us which annual financial is being used. So let's just check into that. I see there my annual financials, and I'm using the 2021 year in my annual financials. So let's go take a look there. I can click in my standardized financials menu option there. I get my list. And remember, my activity details said I'm using my year 2021. And it's the annual. So I can go ahead and click in there. And we'll take a look at the DCR and see why we're getting that point value of 1. in our risk assessment. So in order to see the DCR that's generated, from this annual financial, I want to click in my financial analytics button in my top toolbar. And that's going to take me into my reporting that's generated off my annual financials. So as I dive in here, I'm kind of defaulting to annual and I'm defaulting to core. So I just want to click my view analytics button, and I'm also defaulting to my year that I was in for my financials. So once I click that view analytics, then I see, the various different calculations and evaluations that are offered to me. And so as I scroll down a little bit, I can see my DCR right now is 1.16, okay? So that's why I'm getting that value of 1 point in my risk assessment, because that 1.16, remember, it's falling between 1.0 and 1.2, okay? So let's, just for kicks and giggles, let's go ahead and click back into our property. Let's go into that 2021 financial, and let's change one of the values that's used in our DCR calculation. And then let's look at our risk assessment again, and look at that DCR in our analytics again and see how that affects our risk, okay? It's just a good kind of visual. So I can click back here into my annual financial. And I know that one of the items that's used in the DCR calculation is what's called my admin general. And so that's that line item there in my financial. And right now that's at 46,000. So what I'm going to do is double that. And let's see what that does to our DCR and then ultimately our risk score in our property. Okay. Now you see me editing that financial line item right there in the screen. That's not a typical everyday scenario, right? If you're collecting financials in the system, you very likely are doing that via Smart Docs, right? So that would be coming in that way. But this is just for purpose of demonstration that I'm editing here right in the screen. Okay, so I went ahead and doubled that admin general line item. So let's go ahead and look really quickly while we're here. Let's go ahead and look back into our analytics and see what that did to our DCR. As you can imagine, it went down significantly, right, by doubling that number. So let me click my view analytics again. If you'll recall, my DCR previously was a 1.16. Now my DCR is a 0.78. Okay, so that's a worse DCR. So that means I'm going to get more points added in my risk assessment. So my risk score is going to go up. And remember, I was already in a watch, and potentially even a small adjustment like that could even push me from a watch status to an at-risk status. But let's take a look and see what that did for us. How am I doing on time here? I'm okay. Okay, coming back into my risk assessment, clicking back into that pending record, because remember that pending record is the active record that I'm working on. So when I click back in here, I can see my points went up to 21. Okay, so now I am at risk in terms of my status for my risk assessment in this property. Okay, so if I click to my system generated criteria tab, I can see that, yep, in fact, I'm getting 3 points for that DCR, because remember it was at a 0.78, which that falls between that 0.6 and that 0.8. Okay, so interesting and cool that just a simple numeric number change in a financial can have that much effect on the risk assessment for a property, as well it should. But cool to see it in action and see it live there. So Let's go ahead, and while we're here and while we're kind of thinking about financials, let's take a look at an NOI, net operating income example. Okay. Kind of same sort of concept, right? We set a criteria, and that's located here in my P&L activity. And I've said that if my net operating income is below $2,700 per unit, I'm going to get a score of 3 points. Okay. So, that's going to push me up, which potentially pushes me either towards a watch or an at risk. Okay. So with right now, my NOI is below 2,700 per unit. Okay. It's giving me that 3 points. Let's hop back into that financial, and I'm going to adjust that admin general number again, because that number happens to also be utilized in our NOI. So let's take a look at if we take that admin line item back down in half to that 46, which is what was submitted. Let's take a look at how that affects our NOI and then ultimately our risk score. Okay, so remember, I had pumped that up to 92. I'm going to take it back down to 46. I'm going to save my record, and then I'll hop back into my risk criteria, or I'm sorry, risk assessment, so that I can see what that does to my final risk points. Okay. So I hop back into that risk assessment. And remember, when I'm changing that admin general line item in the financial, it's also affecting my DCR. So I'm really kind of seeing a kind of a big change as I'm editing that number, right? But I can see my score went back down to 16. So if I hop over to my system generated criteria and I scroll down, where's my, how come that's not open? So then I can see that now I'm getting no point value for my NOI, my net operating income, because it's not below 2,700 per unit. So I've got a score of 0 there. So it's not affecting my risk because it's in the range where I want it to be. Okay. So again, just a, real life sort of example to show, how you can configure your risk model kind of around your financials. And, remember that there are quite a few criteria available for you all around annual financials, and including those in your risk model. Okay, so let's take a look now at an example for an inspection that's used within our risk assessment. So again, let's look to our activity detail tab so we can understand what kind of inspection and which one is being used in this risk assessment. So we're gonna focus on our tax credit inspection, and we're gonna take a look at our year 2019. Okay, so I can go ahead and click into my inspections menu option there, and remember, with our inspections, with our annual financials, we're using, the latest year that's either completed in the case of an inspection, approved in the case of an annual financial. Okay, so when I come to my inspections list screen, I do have a lot of inspections listed here. So remember, I wanted to look at my tax credit, and I need to look at the latest tax credit inspection that is completed. That's my year 2019. Okay, that is the record that's being used to evaluate for the tax credit inspection. Okay, so then as I click into that inspection, the criteria that I have configured to evaluate in that inspection is on my results tab. I'm saying, let's take a look at my overall inspection results. Okay, Now, right now for this property, that 2019 is sitting at needs improvement. So that gives me a score of 3 points in my overall risk assessment. Okay, so remember, my risk assessment was at 16 points. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to improve that overall inspection result just to see my risk score get a little bit better. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? After all, this inspection overall results was satisfactory. So I'm going to choose that option, and then I'm going to click save in my top toolbar. And then we'll return again to our risk assessment record and see how that affects that final risk score with regard to that inspection having a better overall result. So right away, I can see, even just looking here on my list screen, I can see that my final assessment points is at 14. So that moved me definitely out of at risk, right? Because I cleared up my financial items, but I'm still sitting, excuse me, in a watch status, okay, for this property. So, you know, just interesting to note and look at and, you know, review what these different criteria can do to that risk score for that property overall, and how it moves that property kind of back and forth between those different risk status. Okay. So that is all I have for today, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Again, remember, all the details of that risk criteria is going to be included in the slide deck that you can receive from the webinar today. And of course, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.
Kelly, thank you so much. Okay, guys, just to wrap up, for ProLinkHFA webinar, the next month one for September 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to be covering pro forma in financials. So we have a financials section of ProLinkHFA that we'll be covering, and we're going to be covering our pro forma functionality within financials. That will include importing pro forma information into the financials in ProLinkHFA, and then reviewing that information within the system as well. We'll release more information about that webinar as we get closer to it, but go ahead and register when you see those notifications from our marketing team to do so. And we look forward to seeing you on September 6th. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.